This is the Studio Shangri-La podcast. And this episode is called Modernizing Psychology. Health and Modernizing Psychology. The multifaceted and multicultural self. Psychology and philosophy absolutely have their instrumental place in examining ourselves and the way we live, and to a larger extent, culture and society. Why things are the way they are, and what our motivations are, reasons for being, reasons for acting the way that we do. And the main point here is that there are a lot of factors influencing the psychology of an individual, and by extension, a huge amount of influences on society. In one's personal psychology, that's quite multifaceted indeed. It comes from one's environment and collection of environments throughout one's life, one's experiences and circumstances throughout one's life. Of course, in formative years or childhood, having a significant impact on how one proceeds. So having a healthy, modernized psychology that embraces different ways of being is very important, so that from the outset, a child or a young person can have the healthiest, most productive experience possible. And yes, that is an ideal for those who seek to attain it. I think it's very important to allow for exploration and the new without issuing a host of blanket statements or programming onto a person, so that they become just another copy of potentially undesirable or unproductive qualities. There has to be a freedom of expression, with, of course, guiding ethical, philosophical principles. And I feel that anyone who would try and deny the importance of philosophy is maybe uncomfortable with ethics, which in my strong opinion on that, that's not good. That someone who shies away from the importance of philosophy or guiding principles, that one who would shy away from that is probably not living in accordance with their what they believe is ethically good and productive. Evolution time, right? Someone like me in this day and in my generation, and certainly younger generations, is more cognizant of these things. All the more reason I feel for me to express these opinions. That there's no blanket psychology for any one person. And let's acknowledge here, and this is very important, that the field or study of psychology is a very white male Euro. And the strong influence of that on academia has to be taken into account. Of course, this is becoming less so, but a lot of things that are taught are from the viewpoint of the white or Euro male academician. So, someone who's looking at such and such as the other, and even themselves as the standard and the superior. So we see this in a lot of educational materials that fortunately nowadays is becoming modernized to include more viewpoints. And this is absolutely essential because having one viewpoint from one particular kind of person be the dominant influence is just simply not reality. And there is a lot to be gained by looking through different lenses, taking in and incorporating different perspectives. It's absolutely essential. Otherwise, the same stuff just keeps being perpetuated and repeated in a loop. There has to be an expansion and broadening of consciousness. Now, the classic name to mention when it comes to psychology, of course, is Freud. And he, of course, was an important figure and had some strong and important points. But is that the be-all, end-all of consciousness? No. And especially not the modern consciousness. He did introduce, in particular, the importance of the life of the mind and how one feels. Or he was one of the important figures, at least in terms of males, right? If we've been listening to the female perspective, all of this would be the importance of listening to all of that would be old news, right? So, of course, Freud was saying that sexual drive is the motivation for a lot of things. Well, I think he said maybe just most things. And the pleasure principle, and very strong points, right? But not all of it. And certainly not today, as people are more inevitably more intelligent and self aware, and the breadth and depth of our human experience is greater than ever it was. Just in the last 20 years, we've seen the explosion of digital and computer technologies. And of course, this has had a huge effect on us. And there are perspectives and motivations from culture to culture and environment to environment that are going to be different. My motivations and set of circumstances are going to be vastly different than, say, a tribe in the rainforest, or even just a smaller city than the US. I'm in Boston, right? Things vary so much. So it's extremely short-sighted to have a blanket psychology for what is and is not, or rather, I should say, what should be and what should not be. And here's where the important role of ethics comes in. Well, then, what is guiding one's conduct then? And that's ethics. And that's in my mind, the simple principle that you should not deliberately do harm. And that's pretty general, with the exception of self-defense, in which one's life is at risk. I feel with the burgeoning awareness of humanity, this is pretty understandable. That this isn't the Wild West, right? There are certain things that we all acknowledge that we don't want to have happen to us, and then therefore that we should not inflict. I don't mean to gloss over any nuances, of course. I'm just speaking in a broad manner. Energetically speaking, I think that ethics matter and are important, and I've said this before in other episodes, that the energy that one propagates will inevitably be amplified. the importance of diversifying the perspective of psychology is extremely important. And not diversifying in such a clinical way. That has its place. But it's so important to be able to look at things in a naturalistic way as well, rather than basically a white Euro male conquering type or dominating type perspective, where I'm right, you're wrong, this is the way things are done, or this is the best way, the superior way. And like it or not, that's philosophy. That's not actually based in logic. And I'm not grudging, actively at least, against white Euro male. It's just the reality. That is just the reality that viewpoint took over as a result of conquering or dominating, even mass killing. That's just the reality. And it doesn't mean that I'm gonna grudge on a white male that I come across. What I mean is that in order to diversify, that has to be acknowledged, that there's been the perspective of psychology and even health in general, yes, medicine and health in general has been skewed towards that perspective of hyper-intellectual to the point of abstraction and compartmentalization in a way that's unrealistic and not so productive. Granted, sometimes it is, right? But it must be acknowledged and put into use the other ways of thinking, other cultural perspectives, the female perspective, however you want to describe that. In other words, the perspective of lots of types of peoples. Otherwise, we're all losing out, right? In the opportunity of growth. To me, the ideal formative psychology is that there is flexibility and individuality. Because, as I said before, individual experiences and factors and variables of that life vary greatly. Yes, are there some common denominators? Sure. Food, water, shelter, comfort. But we're talking about leveling up here, ideally, as a society, as a human family, and pushing one thing aside and saying, you're wrong, I'm right, without trying to understand the conditions and, yes, the philosophy behind it just doesn't make sense anymore. You can't diagnose a life experience, for example, as a disorder. That's just not the reality, and it's not helping anyone. And we need to experience the diverse cultural perspectives of the world, and not just the so-called dominant superpower, quote, perspectives. Because in order for the peoples and the planet to thrive, these so valuable perspectives have to be taken in, such as people living more in harmony with nature and the land. Neuropsychology took a bent against nature, and so, in my opinion, is therefore somewhat flawed. Potentially skewed towards fear and anxiety, and away from spirituality into doctrine, say. Now, the great thing about being alive now is that we are automatically exposed to so many different viewpoints through the internet. And so then there's the task of sort of sorting it out and taking what's useful, leaving the rest. But people's perspectives and what we're exposed to, that's definitely been enlarged to a great degree. And so then we get to decide, what is our philosophy? What is our psychology? Where are we coming from? And where are we going to? It is a self-deterministic enterprise. You've been listening to the Studio Shangri-La podcast, the episode Health and Modernizing Psychology. The multifaceted and multicultural self. For more information, please check out the website studioshangri-la.maison.